every month has a presentation, maybe even more often than that, to developers. And their line is that everything is going to come back, you know, just like it was before. And I find that that gives them a great deal of comfort. I'm sure that they, you know, they're retained all the time by developers who need to have them speak to their bankers and so forth. But I do think that this is going to be long-term, not just in terms of health, but in terms of a cultural shift. And the most telling is what happened in 1918, okay? And in 1918, by the way, there was never a vaccine. In 1918, the way that that particular virus died out is by killing the host. You know, that's what happens to, and let me just actually present this as an idea. We know that there are 3 or 4 strains that are lighter and heavier. They're the ones that you don't even feel, and the ones that make you ill, and the ones that make you very ill, and the ones that kill you. What happens to these pandemics is that the ones that kill themselves, that kill the host, commit suicide. And so the deadly ones gradually disappear. For example, people say that we still have the virus in 1918. By the way, there's somebody making noise again. That we still have the virus of 1918. So it's going to take a long time for this to go away, even with the vaccine, you know, making the vaccine, et cetera. I think we're in it in a dangerous phase psychologically for a couple of years. And then after that, because this kind of virus recurs, it might come back next year, but it might also come back in a different form. I think that anybody who invests in urbanism and architecture will have a marketing advantage. In 1918, the first suburban exodus from cities occurred. Now remember, Americans always did live in single family houses, but they were what we now call inner city neighborhoods. They were as attached as possible to the city. And then in the 1920s, the great developments with the grand names of Coral Gables and Shaker Heights, et cetera, were actually detached from the city. They were not, they were actually accessed by streetcars. And that was part of the fear of urbanism that was associated with death in those days, just like today. The other thing that happened then, if you look at the very early modern architecture, the Neutra health houses, the white architecture of Le Corbusier, the very large windows, you can see it in the renderings. Modern architecture actually got a lot of credibility by saying we are healthy, okay? There's a lot of cross ventilation, there's a lot of sunlight, everything is cleanable. We don't have, we have tubular metal furniture. We don't have a terrible, grotesque cloth furniture that can't be cleaned and so forth. And I think that modern architecture just exploded into the scene, riding on the tremendous effect of the pandemic. Now, bear in mind that what we like to remember is that the 1920s also happened, and then the Depression. And the 1920s was all about Charleston and dancing, et cetera. That is definitely a market segment. There's a huge market segment for people who survive and people who have seen death and they party on. And so, but we're not speaking about that. We're speaking of another market segment that wants to take precautionary measures. And this is, I have some very preliminary work on urbanism and on architecture that looks substantially different, okay? So we're calling it, these are preliminary ideas, but they're actually quite well worked out. Okay, now this is a community design in Colorado with Corkut Honorum. And there was several reasons we initiated this. We wanted to create originally a community that would survive climate change. And it turns out that the overlap between climate change and this is where I don't have enough time to discuss this. I can only discuss the situation with the pandemic, but this also responds to climate change. Now, let me just point out several things. At the center, there's a great open space that actually gets assigned later, depending on what the community wants, including, but it can also be filled in by civic buildings over time. Okay, you approach, and of course there's the one-way pair, and there tends to be workshops in the middle because that's where the traffic is. Then there are quadrants, of which there are, in this case, 4, and each quadrant has a transect within it, and I'm going to get into the detail, and you will see that it actually there's a nesting that goes on, which is really the key to this. But at this level, there's also a field here. This is for solar. This is for solar cropping, energy crops, and this is for food crops, okay? And then there's a large unassigned space for activities not yet known. Could be recycling, we don't know what it is, but I think we actually need to leave space open for stuff that we don't know about. Now I'm gonna take this apart like this, okay? So this is the next stage down. Okay, this is one of these. So these are the quadrants, but now I'm showing you one of these. And these are called, each quadrant, okay, so this is the quadrant. Each quadrant has 8 clusters. Okay, so these are clusters. But the interesting thing about the quadrant is that it has a large space. This large space is programmed by these people. And it is the kind of thing that you can actually vote about what you want. For example, this group may want to have a school, or this group may want to grow vegetables, or this group may want to have a soccer field. But the key thing is you don't have to go to City Hall to decide. It's a much lower increment of decision making. Now this keeps going down, okay? So one of these, each one of these is actually looks like this. And this consists of 8 lots, which are compounds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, okay? And this too has a small space in the middle where you might actually build a shed with a picnic table. And something we've noticed is that with, for example, in Coral Gables, we are establishing already communities of trust, which are certain selected neighbors that, that we trust to be taking care of themselves, and we begin to gather socially. But we don't bring them into the house, we actually bring them to the driveways. There's a lady that has a particularly nice driveway, and we gather there, like an outdoor cocktail party. And so what happens is that in this situation, for example, with this many number of houses, you can actually know all your neighbors, know which are the ones that you can trust, and for example, have them gather in the center, in a shed, or come together for a little bit of sport, or again, we revert back to education and playgrounds. One of the more difficult things to achieve is to actually trust your children to play. Okay, now we're gonna go into one of these. Okay, so this is a cluster of 8 compounds, and these are the compounds. The compounds are 120 feet by 120 feet, and they're owned by a single person. But that person is allowed, depending on the transect zone, they're allowed to build 6 units, or 6 separate buildings, or 5 separate buildings, or 4 separate buildings, etc. You can subdivide slightly to make smaller compounds, but we don't recommend that, because that's just a conventional, house with an additional dwelling unit. Now, what happens at this level is that the owner of the compound, the matriarch or the patriarch, whatever, can assemble the society they need. And that might involve, and it's very particular, it might involve, for example, a large house, a main house, that then goes on to have a couple of houses for the next generation, and a house for the mother-in-law, and then 3 or 4 young men, some of which are adept at defense, at local defense, and some of which are adept at farming, and some of them at let's say, repairing houses and so forth. And there may be health, caregivers, etc. So basically, instead of saying ye must all have a single family house, and maybe you can do something else in your accessory dwelling unit, you can say, no, these are complex situations. You can assemble your society according to your needs. And so now why people say, well, why do you have an owner? Why don't you have a lot of separate individuals owning? And that came from an experience we had in Boulder, where Corkut and I heard that there were a lot of co-housing developments. And I've always been interested in co-housing. That's the stuff that has 12 units. And we said, can we visit some? And they said, do you want to visit one that doesn't have lawsuits? Because those are hard to come by. So you can, you know, what you instantly learn is when you have 20 people who are equals and the vote doesn't go your way and you're in an oppressed minority, you have recourse to the court of law. So we're kind of hard on this. We say there's a principal owner that actually assembles the society. Now, that owner can actually be put into a small business position by actually renting the other units, not just creating a family. Something that's not well known, but one of the reasons that Paris redeveloped so well under Haussmann is that the increment of development, which was a small apartment building, maybe no more than 80 feet wide, actually, well, I'm sorry, 160 feet wide, could actually be done by a single family. And the number of apartments in that unit, in that building, so thousands of people could actually become developers, and thousands of them could make just enough income from a building of that size that they actually became landowners and capitalized. And so that's how Paris got built. It wasn't big developers, it was small developers at the scale of the family. These, what we're speaking of here, are small, again, small developers at the scale of the family. You know, and I think many of us would find it very attractive to form our own societies. In our case, we could invite all new urbanist friends, you know, those who we're still friends with, 2 or 3, and we can, or we can actually rent it and go into business for retirement. So the compound is now the fundamental building type for urbanism. And then it gets assembled, as I said, in the clusters, et cetera. Now, I can't go into detail here, but there is a system of subsidiarity of governance, like at which level at which scale can you actually go ahead and what decisions are made at what scale. It's important to realize that right now, the way even new urbanist communities work, there is nothing between your house and City Hall. If you want to do something, you know, for example, a new park or a new whatever, or change or have an ADU, you have to change the code for the entire city. You have to, all of Coral Gables has to change. All of San Diego has to change. This introduces a much lower level, much greater agility, much more like mammals relative to dinosaurs, so that you can actually deal with the very troubled times we're about to encounter. So these are the 8 compounds. Now, in this particular case, and we've done several of these, the roads are on the outside and the walkways are on the inside. Right? It's a pinwheel which connects to the next. What happens when you have the roadways, when you have the frontage of the units facing in, these are actually alleys on the rear. And the alleys are much less expensive to build. I mean, there are exceptions. This is an elegant street, but almost every cluster has, sorry, I'm sorry, I keep picking up the laser pointer. Okay, so almost, old habit. Now what comes up is that the garages, you see, the garages are on the alley. And so these, in some ways, these houses have 2 full frontages. They have the sociable ones in the front that are internal. And by the way, there are gates. But the alleys, which are the garages, which are I think the future workplaces, I'm going to make that case very strongly, that the most interesting space in a post-pandemic house is the garage, because it's the one that has the greatest flexibility to become a workplace. You know, converting your living room and converting your dining room and converting your bedroom or converting your kitchen for computers, that gets really tiresome. But I have seen some very fine garages turn into very chic offices, like little warehouses. So these are not backs. They're no longer considered backs. The garage is now the premium frontage. This is another project we did. This is in the Philippines. It was just submitted a couple of weeks ago, and it's similar in the sense you can see the system, how it works. But what's interesting in this case is because cars can be stolen, the cars have to be on the inside, and the green walkways on the outside. But it's the same system, except with genuine security problems. And so here's a compound, 6 units. This is a block that consists of 4 compounds with parking in the center. And this is a section or a quadrant. It's a section in this case that actually has 4 of them. Now, in this case, these are open. These are controlled by the 4 blocks, but these are open to the overall place. And this is what they look like. These are 4 compounds. And you can see that how the potential vitality of a system of alleys that actually is pavement. You know, the garage doors, but pavement is where a lot of people hang around parking lots that are small, and kids love to use pavement because they do wheels and they do, you know, they do basketball, etc. I think grass is overrated as a playground material. Although that's not why we initiated this. We initiated this to protect the cars. Typical of some of the subsidiarity of decision-making, they will download some of the tax revenue to each level of subsidiarity. So for example, this particular compound or cluster would have its own sereno, its own a person who's been retained to walk at night, make certain the doors are locked. You know, it's an ancient tradition in which you actually pay for your own security at the level of the block. So it's also important not only that there be representatives at every level moving on to the next level, eventually getting to the town as a whole to make decisions, and that they're geographically representative, not just generically representative, but we're talking about this quadrant, et cetera, but also that some of the tax revenue be downstreamed or localized so decisions can be made. And this is what the floor plan looks like. Of course, it's courtyards, you know, which is increasingly the prime, the most desirable of the building types, at least in our experience. There's privacy, et cetera, and we'll show some of that. Now, I want to show something in terms, this is something that's been designed for another project that we will be submitting next week. And it has to do with actually rationalizing how you design your compound, how it's done. Now, those of you who know about cars, at least German cars, if you were to buy a BMW and you walk into the dealership, they will say, let me build you your car, okay? Let me design your car, let me build your car. And they get on the computer and they say, well, do you want a sports car? Or do you want a sedan, or do you want an SUV? And you say, well, I want a sedan. Okay, then they say, well, we have 5 different body types, 6, and we have the, you know, the 2 doors are the 4 and the 6, or no, the 4 and the 7, and then this is a small, et cetera, et cetera. So they give you a little rap about what the body styles is, and then they tell you what the engines are. And there's a 1.8, and there's a 2.0, and a 2.8, and another 2.8 diesel, and a 3.5 diesel, okay? So you choose separately your body, and if you know, for example, if you know, when you see a BMW, it's the 328 or a 435, what you're seeing is body 4 with a 3.5 liter engine. It's very rational, okay? That's the BMW way they do it. And then you get a package, which both has to do with the color you want, but also the degree of finish. And then the computer puts it all together like this and said, this is your car, and it gives you the price. And you say, well, you've assembled, you've designed your car exactly. And you feel you're in very good hands. By the way, if this is too big, if this is too high a number, sorry. If this is too high a number, you will actually, you can go back and say, look, instead of a 4, why don't you do a 3? You know, they're bigger this year and it'll drop the price $7,000, et cetera. So we're very well in hand. So we did the same thing for the buildings of a compound. There's a 2-story, there's the main house, which is where the principal owner might work, might own, and it's low on bedrooms but high on large shared spaces like living rooms and dining rooms, because everybody in the compound might gather there. And then there's a secondary dwelling of 2 or 3 bedrooms, some of which have kitchens, some of which have basically very small kitchens, and some of which are just pure dorms. And then you have a place which are called retreats, where you go to do your thing, because of course this is all, you know, when you're locked in, it's very oppressive. And then you choose the number of garages you want, and then you choose the pavilions, probably attached with a pool in the case of Florida. So the way you get taken through it, this gets explained to you. You find your lot, and then you say, okay, so this is what they look like. You know, this is the one this is the main house that has 3 bedrooms, if that's what you want. But, you know, really, why don't you just have, you know, 2 bedrooms and a really large, or 1 bedroom and a very large, let's say, great room. And so you're taken through this, you're given the price, you're given the, and you say, this is what I want. And you choose, okay, so you're taking one at a time. What main house do you want? I want that main house. Okay, fine, got it. And then what dormitory or additional dwelling do you want? And it gets explained to you, you have the prices, and you say, I actually want 2 because I have a married, you know, I've got a, et cetera, I've got a bunch of young friends and a couple of retired people, and you choose 2. Okay, and then they say, well, how many of these retreats do you want? You know, are people, do they want to do hobbies? Do you want to work from home, et cetera, et cetera? So instead of sort of scabbing the homework to the house, which is never quite optimal, you buy, these are available, different sizes. They have, by the way, they're designed with all interiors worked out, and you choose 2. And then garages, some people may have a lot of cars, some people less. Many people might choose multiple 3-car garages because they're very, very useful spaces, particularly for workplace. And then you decide whether you want a pavilion and what size it is. So you choose the garage, and then finally you're given the pavilion with the prices like that. Okay, so this is now your compound. These are the elements of your compound, and you say, come back tomorrow, or we will lay it out for you on the computer, and it may be laid out like this. This is a project in Oklahoma that we're presenting next week. And so these are the, for example, two compounds. This is a very particular one in which the L-shaped buildings, the lots are so large. It doesn't have to be L-shaped buildings. You saw the one in Colorado, but the L-shaped building really does help. And by the way, the compound is very low on roads, right? Because only one side actually needs the road. The rest can be walkways. So it's actually strangely efficient. It's like the British close. And now I'd like to bring up a house, a specifically post-pandemic house. There's an aesthetic involved here, which actually is like a warehouse. This is a warehouse aesthetic, not only because it's a popular aesthetic, but because it's tough times out there on the street. You want to be resilient, you don't want to look rich. If somebody actually throws some graffiti at you, it might actually enhance the look. So the main thing that happens is you don't do a McMansion bragging that you're rich. And you don't give them a front yard that they can come and throw shit at, you know, like papers and stuff. You actually go right on the street. But the main thing are these 3 elements, okay? So above is the sociable space. So the porch is not on the ground floor because it's actually too vulnerable. It's above. It still plays a terrific part in the neighborhood. And then there are 2 garages, which I'll show you, and a place. These are the 2 garages. Notice that the garages are much wider than necessary, because they're not designed for cars at 12 feet. They're actually designed as offices that happen to have cars in them if that's what you wish. Okay, they're also split so you can actually convert one and keep, convert one and keep the other, right, like that. By the way, this kind of thickness is all about looking resilient. Now here, this is something we've noticed in our neighborhood, is that people sit outside. In our case, it's called a stoep, which is a South African sitting area. And so there are people you don't bring into your house. You actually sit there. By the way, that I'll show you later, that's cross-ventilated. You not only need outdoor space, you need ventilation. Okay, there has to be a breeze running through it. And because this is a dead end, this, as you will see, is an open ceiling above. Then you enter a cleanup room. And the main thing about the cleanup room is you leave behind what you bring in, including groceries, mail, all sorts of stuff. And whenever you close the door, and there's a sink, whenever you close the door of the cleanup room, the UV lights go on. Okay, that's already a known killer to the virus. You enter a conventional house, except in this case, it's Palladian, not for formal reasons, because we don't want corridors. We want the bedrooms, in this case, 3 bedrooms, to be psychologically very apart from each other. When you're in a corridor, you may have whatever you have, but when you close the door, you know who's near you. In this case, it actually feels psychologically very separate. Now, each of these bedrooms is not just a bedroom, it's like a bed sitting room. It's fully equipped with places to sit and read, places to work, super video, bed, lots of storage, your own bathroom. Okay? The idea that you have a bedroom and you have to go out into the public at all times when you might be locked in, I think has to be rethought. So you have 3 of these. And now let's talk about this. This is a courtyard house, but the courtyard is not in the center. Okay, the courtyard is in the center because the center courtyard doesn't necessarily ventilate, and if you designed it, you know that you need corridors inside. Whenever you have a central courtyard, you need corridors. But this is a different system in which this is the open space. And by the way, these are options. You can have a garden or a pool or nothing at all, or a vegetable garden. But what happens is you have these nana walls, you know, these folding doors that open up. And so this space is the very opposite of air conditioned. It's just a roof space that's because this is a 50 by 100 foot lot, this is 100 feet wide. Okay, so you have an enormous outdoor space, and instead of having indoor-outdoor, you truly don't have indoor-outdoor. This whole thing is one huge thing. You'll hear me repeat that actually the important thing is not to have a living room, but a media room, et cetera, okay? So that's the first floor, and then you go up the stairs, and here it's important to have an unassigned space with partitions where people can turn into whatever they want. And I've seen people turn it into classrooms, into gyms, into storage areas, and then you have the porch. Notice here, the open to below, that is the stoop, the waiting place that actually ventilates, you know, that allows cross ventilation through. This is the section, this is the courtyard. By the way, solar panels, not shown from the street, can occur on the flat section. And this is you can see how large the veranda is, the garage, et cetera. It's a relatively simple house. This is a cut that shows the cross ventilation. You know, remember you have to have cross ventilation here on the living room. Everything's cross ventilated now. You know, when I started designing these things, I said, when was the last time I really thought about cross ventilating every room? It's something we talked about, something like 30 years ago. And yes, in principle, we read about it and we're supposed to do it, but we've actually fallen flat on the cross ventilation. And so, you know, it's just sobering to see how often have I thought of that? Not often. So this is the front. It's a very particular aesthetic, which I think has a future. It's a of course, garage doors are beautiful these days. There's the aluminum garage doors that can actually form very, very good classy offices. And that's the building that I just showed you. Other than the front, which is defensible, the sides are very protected, and you can style it anyway. This is one we're going to present for to Windsor, you know, to see if they bite on some of their very nice alleys that don't have rear garages. But I think this makes some sense. This is how they stack. It's 7 to 8 units to the acre. They touch. They're not complete party walls, but they're partial party walls. Like for example, of course, the back nobody cares, so you can touch. The courtyards can touch, and you have little slots on the sides, et cetera, you know, for machinery and trash, et cetera. So it's not a party wall building. It's not a complete courtyard building. It's something else that touches and then doesn't touch sometimes. And this is the Alice version, which doesn't have a covered group. So that's what they look like. That's what they look like. Now, this is another thing. What is a live-work unit or a townhouse like? One of the problems with townhouses is that when you bring the living room to the front, you have to raise it from the passerby, right? Because it's at 0 setback, so you have to raise it. Once you raise the living room to the front, you are actually having a difficult time getting to your yard, which is in the back. So we say, why not have, this actually reverses it. In this case, the outbuilding is in the front. And that outbuilding is much more flexible because it's in the front. It can become an office, it can become a rental apartment, it can become a live-work place without screwing up your floor plan. I think the problem with all the live-work units we've designed is that we put the live-work on the first floor, which means that the work enters the principal dwelling. It totally discombobulates the proportions of the plan. There's too much on the first floor, not enough on the second, you know, and so forth. So why not take the outbuilding, you know, and put it in the front like this, and then have a courtyard in between. So this is what the plan looks like. This is the room that's flexible. You can enter it directly. You can enter it from the inside. It's got a very nice loggia. And then, lo and behold, the living room can now use the courtyard. This isn't correctly done. That would be open here. But the living room is now is flush to the garden, which is quite rare in the living room of a townhouse. It might happen in the rear. And the rest is conventional. You climb the stairs and you go, oh, sorry. You climb the stairs and you go up. There's an efficient second floor. Okay, so this might not look like much in terms of radical rethinking, but putting the outbuilding in front is a radical rethinking. And this is what it looks like. It's obviously for Alice Beach, and this is the section. This is again in error. This should be a sliding glass door. So you come straight out. Of course, you go up a little bit because you have to be above the cars in the back. Okay, so. But this is kind of key, that you can actually come out into the garden, and this is the front unit. By the way, also very good in terms of keeping, remember, the stranger is dangerous until proven otherwise. The stranger is danger. And so you need to keep, you need to kind of buffer from them. And this, I'm not exaggerating, you keep away from people on the streets until proven otherwise. Okay, so there it is. I mean, it's got a particular, it's amazing, this vocabulary, though, how clearly and easily it solves certain formal problems, like the party wall and so forth. And then this is something you've seen before. This is one of our carpet cottages for Alice. These are interlocked, like these are the units, 2 and 3 bedroom, and they're interlocked like this. They share a great amount. They're all fee simple. They're on their own ground, but they share a huge amount of wall space. So they're relatively inexpensive, and everything's on the ground floor. So this is what we would consider a kind of retirement unit. And that's what they look like. They don't look attached, by the way, because as they go back and forth, they don't look attached. They look freestanding, although this actually achieves about 30 units to the hectare. I mean, to the acre, almost 30 to the acre. The AC, of course, would be in the flat. The air conditioning would be on the flat portion in the back. Now, this is one of the key things. This one is a unit, which is an apartment building. And I think there are a lot of rules for apartment buildings that we have to rethink. One is that they shouldn't be more than 5 stories, because you can walk up the 5 stories. You don't have to get into an elevator. The second thing is that the first floor, you don't want to live on the first floor, because a stranger is danger, as I said. So you can either have shops, if that's your situation, or you can have parking in the first floor. The second thing, and this is the single most important, is we've got to be very serious about our open space. We can't just do these narrow, useless balconies that we do reflexively, that are just there to have sliding glass doors, to open out, and you can't really use for anything. That space outdoors has to be serious. And I believe it has to be, let's say in this case, it's 18 by 18 by 18 feet. It has to feel like an outdoor space. It has to actually allow the sunlight in. And in this case, by the way, you'll see that this is a very weird floor plan, because it's anti-New Urbanism, that it's echeloned. It's not parallel to the street. The reason is that every street on earth has a breeze that comes from one direction and not another. And since the breeze is absolutely primary, you want to capture it. This is something that is done. Steve Muzan has written about this, certain ways that Dutch doors open to capture the breeze that's coming down the street. This is what you're seeing here. Okay, so let's go into it. This is a single unit. Okay, what you're seeing here are the 2 garages. These pair belong to the apartments above. These are for guests. You also have this interesting thing, which is this is where the deliveries take place. They're slightly refrigerated with a very small through-wall air conditioning. $125. Things stay cool while you're at home. And the stair is open in the back and is larger than usual and pleasant enough that you would take it up. There's an elevator, but the stair is not a form of torture. Okay, now the second floor, which is here on the left, the corridor, lo and behold, is outside. Very, very modernist. And that is because the corridor outside doesn't, it doesn't gather the droplets that apparently now hang around mortal, frightening everybody for 6 hours or 18 hours or whatever the doctor says, in an interior space. So the public space, it opens like that. It has a secondary, it's designed in such a way that you can have one of these outdoor gathering places in which people can speak at some distance. And of course, there's a little office, kind of filter here. But the main thing is when you enter here, on the right is the bathroom, on the left is that room, one of these cleanup rooms. In this case, not only does it have a sink and a shelf for the UV light, it's got a washer dryer. Because people take their clothes off there and, their outer garments, and they put them in. I mean, all medical personnel does that. People who've been with infected people do that, et cetera. You don't want to bring your clothes into the house. Then you enter through essentially a double height foyer, and you enter the living room. Now notice that the living room is actually a media room. I think inviting guests in such a way that you have to impress them because they're semi-strangers is an old way of doing things, and you should really actually begin with the large screen. Dining room also is much larger than usual because you want a big table, again, for spacing. It's not that more people are there. The kitchen actually becomes, because it's so often a workplace with computers, you have to take the computer seriously. You have plenty of plugs, a place for a printer, etc. This is the family who likes to hang around here. And then here you see the 18 by 18 foot outdoor space that, of course, with this kind of nano wall folding door, actually just flows in like that. Okay, so it becomes one thing. When you go upstairs, you arrive at a hallway. There's a master bedroom, etc. There are balconies that look down. Okay, so it is activated. This isn't a dead space. The bedrooms can look down on it. And interestingly, when a fire stair provides automatically and freely a second means of egress for a special. This is like an outbuilding. This is like an ADU. If you have a door directly from the fire stair in, now this is particularly easy to do because it's a skip-stop apartment, right? It doesn't have a corridor in every floor. And one of the reasons is to get the cross ventilation, which wouldn't be available if things are double loaded. And then you keep going upstairs. This is the apartment above, which is identical, but on top, and this is something that's also modernist, the roof garden, the flat roof is a wonderful place for sun, for outdoor exercise, for health, and in this case, a pool. And in this particular building, the pool is actually put right on top of the fire stairs and elevator that don't need to go all the way up. They don't need to go to the 4th floor. So you have a very highly structured, you have a highly structured, you have a very strong structure just ready to actually provide a pool like that, which I think would be very valuable. And by the way, barbecuing and all this. Partially, this is the Spanish concept of the patio, which is kept relatively neat, and a tras patio, which is where the mess is, including the barbecue and the people in bathing suits. Okay, so we think that this unit, this is the street at the bottom, we think that this particular apartment building should be no more than 6 units. We are very, just having spoken to some people in New York, the small apartment buildings, you're not likely to meet other people in the hallways or the lobby. So we take 6, for example, in this case, to be essential. This is the 6 stacks with the elevator in the central place, but everybody gets the outdoor spacing. And by the way, I do think that you can maintain street space with this. Okay, I think you can maintain street space better than the stupidly articulated modernist buildings that are actually square to the street. This may not be square to the street, but it is actually has a very, very strong potential to actually maintain street space. Needless to say, the breeze in this case is coming from the left of the drawing and coming in. And by the way, not too bad. Lots of the master bedroom and the living room actually have a long view. You see what's cool about this? This balcony actually has a long view that way. In the case of Alice Beach, for which this is designed to have a view of the ocean. Like that, and then the upper floor, and then this I already showed you, everybody with a pool. This is what it looks like. Some people say, well, that looks awfully expensive. I don't think so. This is you saw the floor plan. It is absolutely, there's no excessive articulation or funny things. But it does have a spectacular open space that actually has spectacular possibilities with balconies within, like that. Okay, and this is what the section is like. I think anybody who inhabits that, who walks into that, will find it rather awesome. This is the street. You can see that it does have potential for I mean, this is not very developed drawing. And this above all is what you see. Now, yes, the first floor is not inhabited in the conventional way of storefront or anything, but you know, just if you've ever looked at a terrace and seen people gathered in a terrace or having a party in a terrace, it's one of the most enviable and fascinating things you can do. So that's the building. You can see it's not that difficult to build it. Now, this is another one. This is actually a double loaded one that has, this you might say is like a courtyard, is like a duplex. But this one's actually genuinely like having a house, a couple of stacked houses, a lot of the same rules. There's the, you know, the parking with garage. This is the first floor. In this case, I'll show you what happens. In this case, I'm just going to show you the whole building because it's better assembled. Okay, so this is the building. It's 8 apartments. And you can see that the garage doors are locked, right? You don't want anybody touching your door handle. And you have, this is where Amazon drops off groceries, etc. Okay, again, with light air conditioning. And you have a stair that comes up if you don't want to take the elevator. There's an elevator, but not really. There's an elevator in the back. And then there's the grand open air lobby like this, in which you enter the building here. But you also have a stair that goes in the back that, by the way, allows you, this is very much, this is the lobby. This is where you bring the groceries in, etc. Okay? And actually it's a villa with a courtyard like that. It's a stacked villa. I think apartments like this are actually seen only at the very top of Manhattan buildings, in which you know, somebody has a skyscraper and then you see a villa. But it's a very substantial yard. The upper floor is like this. There's a couple of nice things about it. First of all, the fire stair is used again to enter a separate unit, you see, in the skip stop. So this is a separate person. Up here, you can actually take the stair and project the media room. It can be very easily sloped, and you have an enormous screen at some distance, you know, doing that. And of course, there's the master bedroom like that. So it repeats, you know, there you see it, the lobby, grand old thing, the upper floor, etc. And this is what it looks like, kind of slightly Lucianesque. Obviously, the upper apartment with the open courtyard would be a pretty amazing experience to find yourself up there. That's the look. It also breaks I must say in Alice, there's some very skillful apartment buildings in terms of decoration, but the plans and the balconies are very conventional. You know, these are different kinds of plans, much more like very popular houses, and the look is completely different as well. So that's what it looks like on the street. And from above, you can see clearly that actually it's not that difficult to build. Okay, it's just, you know, it's articulated, but it's articulated in a very sober way. It just looks difficult, but it isn't. Now, retirement. One of the things that is a real loser in the pandemic is that retirement homes are pretty much like sending your relatives to a concentration camp, except possibly with higher death rates. You know, like you read of one that 83% of the patients died, 45 died, and so forth. You know, you really can't honestly send your parents. So this is an assisted living unit, and it's handicapped accessible. You enter. There is, of course, the media, emphasis on media. There is, above all, a courtyard, a sunny courtyard, right? There is a standard, you know, a kind of a bit of a play kitchen, because actually your food can be delivered through here, like that, so you can heat it up, or your groceries can be delivered through here, and then there's a bathroom and a pretty nice bedroom, all handicapped accessible, and these are L-shaped units like this, okay? And the L-shaped units are assembled like this, like very much like the Carthusian monasteries. If you look at the Carthusian monasteries, they don't have monk cells, they actually have houses, L-shaped houses with quite nice gardens. So you put them like this, you put a relatively inexpensive walkway all the way around like that, open air. You stick 2 buildings in, one which has a big space, like for common dining, or perhaps even for music or entertainment or dancing, and one of which has small rooms for clubs to be generated and so forth. There's a tight paved plaza here, very close to the entrance. So you're at the center of activity and also close to the to the goings on at the entrances of the two buildings, and then you have a large green space. So there's two entirely different kinds. Actually, if you count the peripheral walkway like this, and then this and this, there's quite a lot of public open space. So there's a whole hierarchy of open space here. Now, you can also tack on, obviously, a pool and a parking lot. Now, this is what's amazing about this. This whole thing from here to here is 190 feet. That's all, which means that it actually fits on a block. This is not something that has to fly in somewhere like a spaceship. It actually fits on a block. So here you see what I just described to you, and you can see street to street that you can actually just buy a few through lots of 100 foot deep, which is absolutely conventional. Maybe you can buy 8 lots or 10 lots like that and build something within urban fabric. Very, very flexible in that regard. The presentation to the street is excellent with some security. Also, your kids can visit if you wish without going through, a lot of hassle. They can go directly into the house. You don't have to be processed institutionally if you don't want. And a very simple walkway in the middle, the ambulatory, which actually just uses steel columns with New Orleans, New Orleans prefab, New Orleans capitals, etc. Is that all? I guess I'm done. Okay. So can we switch on for comments, please?
Yes. While some people are getting to the question mark phase, Anders, can you go ahead and I'm curious, what do you think the impact of drones are going to be on privacy and security?
It's interesting because I think, before drones, there were these cameras everywhere. And I remember my shock when I was working on West Palm Beach, quite a poor neighborhood. And I would say that the people concerned for the poor people who live there were very much against cameras. And I remember the local residents saying, no, we love cameras. We want to know, they scare people away that are the wrong kind of person. I think drones might be ambiguous. If it's a police drone in Canadian mounted police red, let us say, that might be welcome. But I think that drones should have a right. You should actually be able to shoot them down without, which is relatively easy to do with a shotgun. You should be able to shoot them down without too much trouble. But I really don't know. I don't know, but I know that people really do like security, including automatic security.
Right. I saw Jim shaking his head in agreement.
Oh yeah, I'm down with the idea of shooting down the drones.
And
I do think that there will be some innovation in weapons to enable that to happen.
Well, what about a Whammo slingshot?
There you go. Yeah, old technology.
Shotgun shell that'll shoot a net.
Mm-hmm. Oh, a net, yes. Yes, of course, and then you can actually recover it and step on it. Or
Now, my sense of this is that the design elements are very meticulously and rather elegantly thought out, and I appreciate that. What I'm wondering about is there's a whole other component to the pandemic, which is the economic component. And it's going to include a lot of things that, as you know, I've written about, we're not prepared for. But probably the biggest one is going to be capital scarcity. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how much that's going to get in the way of our plans.
Well, these buildings are very refined and expensive buildings. They're essentially for Alice. But the Corcut and my conception of that place out in Colorado was primarily self-built. Those tiny little, as long as the buildings are small enough, they can't do very much harm, if they're self-built and don't have particularly good carpentry. In the original drawing, we actually had mobile homes, but that just caused the controversy, that distracted everybody. But I think self-building should be enabled, particularly if one cluster decides that they want to allow it. You know, you don't have to decide at the level of the city or at the level of the state or at the level of the nation whether you're going to self-build. What if you just decide at the level of the cluster? You know, whether people can self-build. That's much more agile.
I would imagine very little supervision from the municipality. I don't think we're going to have the money to even hire these people and pay them.
I agree.
Andres, can you go ahead and stop sharing your screen so people can see you a little better?
Where's stop sharing? Okay, great.
Okay. Would someone else like to ask a question? If so, unmute yourself and ask the question.
I have a question. So the way that you presented it was, it was almost kind of gleeful. Like, oh, look at this terrible thing that happened and this is how we're going to solve it. And, you know, I was sitting here as if I was the client and wondering between, wow, these are really novel ideas for interior planning, just even independent of the pandemic, alternating between fear. And so the question is like, how, is there a way that it could be presented in such a way that these are great ideas architecturally? And oh, by the way, if the pandemic actually does end up happening, these are ways that it could solve that. But there's also the very real scenario that it might just go away and things could potentially go back to normal, which is, I think, what most people want to hear. Because the other part of it is, I mean, you can look at houses that were built and how much things have changed. Like, nobody has ice delivered anymore, but houses used to have a room from the exterior where the iceman could come. So if you're designing, say, a glove as opposed to a mitten, like, shouldn't it be more like a mitten?
Gary, you're very, 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 that's really, really good advice. Tomorrow, I'm presenting this to Alice tomorrow. And I've told myself, you have to present this as delightful, fantastic units. Just like you said, that incidentally have this other aspect.
Yeah.
It's really, and I think it's very important to do that because it's shocking to people that are not steeped in this, i.e. people who don't read about, who don't read Kunstler every day. It's very shocking to actually see how comfortable you get with dealing with problems like that. It's very, and we must remember to show it the way that you say, present it that way. Most of the units are delightful. There's nothing wrong with living in them. You know, they're nice. So,
yeah, I mean, you know, you could present that just from an architectural perspective and leave the whole pandemic thing out of it.
Yeah.
And most people would look at it and say, wow, these are great ideas independent of what's going on. It's just that when you layer the pandemic part on it, people sort of get frightened. And you know, people generally in architectural presentations don't want to be frightened.
well, that's why Kunstler is so popular.
Wait until I start wearing my Nixon mask.
So anyway,
You know, Gary,
You don't have a Nixon tattoo on your back?
enormously good advice. Just I can't say enough about it.
Gary, I will say this: that the thing about people not being frightened, that's already happened anyway. So that horse is out of the barn.
Yeah, but you know, our experience is we're still continuing to practice, and you know, maybe we're not as forward thinking as others, but we're still presenting things as if, you know, the world hasn't changed, and in the future it might be more like what it was, you know, before the pandemic. And so, you know, and that's less of a frightening way to present.
But you know what's interesting about this? Like all the cool stuff, and I do think that there's a lot of cool DNA here.
Yeah.
Traditionalists don't use. That came because of the disruption of thinking about the, you know, it's like this, the sand in the oyster. We wouldn't have thought about these things unless we had these problems. So, but I think you're absolutely right. If they're not delightful, they won't sell anyway. So what the hell? You know, you have to present the way that Gary said.
That was my question.
Yeah, well, I'll be doing it tomorrow. You probably saved the project for us, Gary.
Can I ask you a question?
You actually seem quite
Bruce.
Yeah.
Marina, why don't you ask the question next?
The idea of the compounds are very compelling. And, you know, as we're thinking about homeschooling our child, because schools aren't going to be open in Maryland anytime soon, I worry about, and we're hearing people say, oh my God, if everybody's going to take their kids out of public school, we're going to see a tremendous disinvestment in cities. And so I worry about how do you prevent people from becoming completely insular and disengaging from the city when they live in these compounds and they can be.
Well, I think it's, you know, like everything else, a matter of choice. This is a choice that's not available right now. There are extremes of choice. Public school, you know, the huge school with you don't know who's teaching you the kid, and then homeschooling. And, you know, we know what, half a dozen people who homeschool. There should be something in between, you know, and this offers that. By the way, this is not manifested in the plan per se. It's just a choice that could be made if you had this kind of subsidiary decision-making level.
I was thinking about it, not necessarily only for schools, but as people tend to care about their compounds and who lives in the compound, they may care less about what happens on the outside of the compound.
Yeah, yeah. But they may care more. But okay, if you look at the numbers, there's 6 per compound. Okay, so 6 for 48. There are 48 houses in a cluster. And, you know, I've lived in Coral Gables. Liz and I have lived for 43 years, and we don't know people in 48 houses. We don't even know people in 5 houses. So you are forced, this is actually probably an increase rather than a decrease.
Well, if you lived in one of your communities, you would know that many people.
You would.
As we do.
But Andreas, a compound is going to be difficult to pull off in most locations because most land that's in a place where people want to develop has built into the land the value of development right away.
Right.
And so, you know,
well,
how do you get somebody to pay substantially more
mm-hmm.
right away? It's going to have limited appeal, right?
Well, you know, Steve Mouzon developed the idea of the sky method, in which the principal person buys a lot and buys and builds a house and has the right to build 5 more. Okay, when the 5 more are built, they pay to the developer, to the master developer. You know, so basically every person becomes a salesperson.
Right. But how many lots have been sold pursuant to the sky method?
Well, the 2008 didn't help.
That's true.
But one thing about there's also land that is not very well located. Like we have a particular client now that has, I don't know, 250,000 acres that are kind of near Atlanta, Austin, Houston, you know, but they're not. And so he wants to know, how do we increase value? And I said, you know, until recently, proximity and visibility were an asset, but if things fall apart, some distancing and invisibility may become an asset. You can actually, you know, a little bit like Serenbe. Right. We are really far from Atlanta. You know, we have to really think how much of the new urbanist conventions are actually perhaps destined for the trash heap of history. We hope not, but it may be.
Susan Henderson has a question.
Thanks, Nathan. So this is in response to Marina's comment, and that is being from New Mexico and being very familiar with the environment both in Taos, Santa Fe, and Albuquerque. There's no evidence in this society that the intimacy of the compound disengages the residents from the cities. In fact, I would go so far as to say we're probably as or more engaged with our cities as a whole than most any place I'm familiar with as far as activism goes and intimacy. But it is, you know, the interesting thing, the compound I think works a lot like the plaza or the civic space in that the average American doesn't know how to use it. And really that level of engagement and connectivity is something that I think there's a learning curve. And so I'm not quite sure, Andres, how you would suggest approaching that.
I would suggest that the first thing is to actually have people design their own place, which is what's implied here. You know, they get to choose what they do. There could be a single family house or 2 or 3. I think that's important, rather than we deciding what they want. You know, one of my ideals is that we don't have to, is that we don't plan anymore. We just decide who makes decisions. You know, so we say, okay, so decisions at the level of the military gets made in Washington. You know, the decisions at the level of the security of the compound get made by the compound, and you download decisions to the level where that's the most local possible, and that goes for architecture. That goes for architecture as well. And to have very, very light codes about things that matter. Because when you write a code, you don't design the whole city. What you're designing is at most a cluster of 8 compounds. And I think there might be a really good competitive, I mean, Liz and I live in Dutch South Africa Village. And because we share, people who share, you know, Merrick built some 8 villages in the 1920s. They have different styles, Chinese village, Dutch village, etc. There is a group in each of these villages. The people in the villages all know each other because they share a look. Imagine if they actually shared something even more than that. But I think you don't need to know more than 48 houses. I mean, your whole life. That's more than enough. Hey, Steve, what's that behind you?
That's a bunch of little huts in the mountains of California where we stayed one night. It was pretty fascinating. But
They don't seem to have insulation.
they have no insulation at all, and it was about 35 degrees that night. That means that you huddle up close.
Mm-hmm.
It was a 2-dog night.
Yeah, fantastic. Very interesting. Good.
Right.
It looks like I think it looks like your head, the one that's behind you.
Any other questions? If not, I want to thank you, Andres, for the presentation. It's great as usual, and I appreciate everybody's attention. And we're going to go, this has been recorded, and we'll go ahead and make it available for some folks later.
Okay.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Come up with another